All right. So the recorder is on, and we are back in class. So after 4 days of no classes, do you guys have any questions about using App Inventor or general app programming? Any issues? Any questions? Yes.
I couldn't get into App Inventor the lab this morning.
Okay.
Going around in circles. I don't know what to do after I get to the Google introductory screen.
Google introductory screen.
That's what I get after I log in twice.
Okay. So sometimes maybe it would do that. So it's just appinventor.mit.edu.
I get this.
You got it this one, and then we go
I have
to
to log in twice.
Okay,
what do
so
you just click to get here.
I clicked here. I clicked invent.
Okay, click invent.
Yeah, and then I can get into here. And right now, my.
Well, I don't get this screen.
Well, you don't. You should get this screen. If you don't get this screen, that means you're not logged in as in any account. So instead of this screen, what do you get?
Well, I get the two prompts to log in.
Okay, so let me log out first, so I can kind of show you the same thing. So I'm gonna sign out from both accounts. All right. So okay. So now sign out from both accounts. I'm gonna refresh this particular screen. Click invent. And do you see this screen?
No. Oh yeah, I do see this screen.
Okay, if you see this screen,
yeah.
I would log in using a new tab to the Los Rios, website. So I would go to losrios.edu and sign in as a student here. I'm not sure exactly how. Oh, there's no login screen from here. Oh, okay. The other way you can do it is to enter your entire email address, which is based on your student ID at apps.losrios.edu, and then type in your usual district password, and it's going to forward you to this particular page. Okay, get this page and then log in again, like that. Okay, mine is going to expire soon, but that's okay. All right, so now you log in.
Then I get this screen.
Then you get this screen, and then what you need to do is to go back to the App Inventor website.
How'd you go back with the return key?
No, I just open a new tab and then type, appinventor.mit.edu. I could have used the back key, but I just opened a new tab.
We got that screen asking for the ARC login.
Yeah.
Okay, then what did you do?
Okay, so I logged in using this screen. I kept it here.
Tab.
I opened a new tab here. Click this thing here, in Google Chrome.
How did you open a new tab? You click new tab, right?
I click new tab or Control T.
Then what?
Yeah, and then I just type in the URL again to appinventor.mit.edu.
Okay.
And then from here you can click invent again, and this time I only have one choice. You click allow.
Okay, I didn't get that screen. I don't get that screen.
You will once you log into the Los Rios district.
Okay.
Yep.
When you click on connect to a device, so if you connect to the cell phone via Wi-Fi,
it doesn't work here, unfortunately.
Well, no, I was doing it at home, so I scan it, and it runs the app.
Yeah,
if I do an update to it, do I got to click reset connection and then do the Wi-Fi again, or will it update automatically?
It's automatic.
Okay.
It is automatic. Let me just let everybody know about what you just said. If you already have a connection, whenever you make any changes to your screen and your blocks, it gets updated on your phone automatically. At least that's my experience.
And do you know by the phone on the screen stops blinking?
Okay.
It's like it may be corrupted. Try downloading it again.
Yeah, you might need to do it again. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
So the phone icon that turns gold or whatever color it is,
it should turn green.
It'll turn green once it's done updating? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it should turn green when it has established a connection and have both sides running. The Wi-Fi issue we have here, we cannot use the Wi-Fi way of setting everything up because they are blocking port 8001 and 9987. I looked up already. So I have already sent a request to our IT department here to have those ports open. And they have to be open in a way that is allowing incoming connection, because that's what's happening is the MIT server is trying to use those 2 ports to connect to your cell phones, through Wi-Fi. And that's why, I have to let IT know to let those 2 incoming ports open and not just outgoing. Actually, I take it back. That's really weird that it has to be incoming. I think it's outgoing too, because my home router is not set up to allow those 2 ports, incoming, and it's only outgoing. So,
Which ports are they?
8001 and also 9987. So they need 2 ports to be open. But I think both are outgoing ports and not incoming, which should be a lot easier to set up. Has very little security impact when it's outgoing. But with the district, they block everything unless there's a justification, which means I probably have to do some paperwork to get those 2 ports, open for outgoing, connections, which is like.
Might get it next year.
No, they know me well enough that it probably will be done soon. All right, so let's go ahead and continue with our topic. So today we'll talk about something. We'll do 2 things at the same time. Okay, so what we'll do today is we'll focus on application design, and we'll talk about what a sequence diagram is, and then we'll take a quick look at basic user interface, because I expanded on that one a little bit and explained what a screen can do, because there are a lot of interesting things you can do with just the screen itself. So I added this note here called properties of the screen, which is new. It's not really very deep, but it is useful in many ways. If we still have time left today, what I can also do is I can release this one here. You won't even see it, because it's actually hidden, so it's not even pending on any activities. But it's called OOP in App Inventor, which means object-oriented programming, but from the perspective of App Inventor. Most people who use App Inventor and know about OOP would instinctively say, but it's not possible to explain object-oriented programming using App Inventor. I beg to disagree. Okay, so there are ways to explain OOP in App Inventor. It's just that you cannot make any new classes in OOP, but the concepts are still there. So if we have time, we can open up this particular topic, because it's not finished yet. I'm still typing it, so we'll see how it goes today. All right. It is already past due for the first homework assignment. I think most people got it done without any problems. It is called Perfect Start. It's really just for uploading a zip file, so I can download your zip file, re-upload it to App Inventor, test it, and give you your score. We are 5 more minutes before I pass the row sheet. All right. Are there any questions about project 1, proposal 1, which is basically the first draft of your proposal? Yep, go ahead.
Does it have to be something unique, or can you make something someone else has already made?
It will be something that you are going to do this semester. So you might want to make it kind of customized to what you want to do. I don't want to give you guys a fixed project, because otherwise some people may find it fun, and some people find it useless and boring. So I want you guys to pick the right project for yourself. The low bar is really low, which means I'm only making the assumption that someone is taking this class along with cisp362. Okay, so it only has minimal amount of logic. Yep.
Since we don't really know the full limitations of App Inventor, can we kind of revise it and go along?
Oh yeah. That's why it's numbered as proposal 1, which means this is just a rough idea of what you want to do. As I go over these proposals, I can make suggestions, because I already know a little bit more about what App Inventor can do. So I can actually tell you whether it is even doable or not, or oh, this is like way too easy. You might want to add some complexity to it. Okay. Yep.
Could you demonstrate in Omelette how to move the arrows around? How to move the direction arrows around in Omelette?
In Omelette? Okay, we can do that. But okay, all right, we can do that. But let me try to see are there any additional questions. Yep.
Is this like the final project, or will there be others?
This will be one project that you'll be working on, so that we can, basically put in all the discussion, the class discussion. We'll basically practice everything that we learn in your project.
So this is not the final one?
We have a final exam. So we have a final exam in addition possibly to a project. Yep. All right. Any other questions? Yep.
I had a real problem downloading Omelet.
Okay.
When I finally did find Omelet, it kind of like tricked you into loading these different apps that kind of look like you're downloading Omelet.
Okay, so you go to Omelet.
Omelet.com, yeah.
Okay, you go to omelet.com, you go to changes here. The first few links are the ones that you want to download. So you can download Omelet 12.1 standalone. I would not download the Eclipse plugin because I have not even talked about Eclipse in this class. So you just click on this one, and from the zip file, from the URL, it shows you it is a zip file. You just unzip it and double click on the tar file, and that should run.
Yeah, how did you navigate from that page from the first page?
Huh? Oh, I just typed Omelet and in Google and search for it.
Oh no, I'm on their page, omelet.com, but get to that page from the
Okay,
first
let's
page.
do that during the lab time because I don't want to use the lecture time for this.
Does it need a lot of memory to download?
No.
No. Okay.
No, it's a tiny little app. As long as you have Java already installed, it should be good. All right. So to answer your question, how to draw arrows, we're going to do that in the lab time too. Okay, so we're going to focus on the other stuff that we have to go over during the lecture. All right. All right, so project proposal 1 is due on Wednesday. It's not due today, it is due on Wednesday, so we still have time to work on it. I'll try to answer all the questions regarding Omelet during the lab time, which is going to happen in about an hour and 20 minutes. All right. So we'll focus on application design, and this time we'll be talking about sequence diagrams, another type of diagram in the UML, the Unified Modeling Language. Okay, this question seems to be kind of silly. Okay, do you know what your quote-unquote will-be app is supposed to do? Most people would quickly answer that question and say, of course I do. I'm going to write that app. Of course I know what it's supposed to do. Well, most people know what some of the features or how some of the things will be done, but not the entirely what the app is going to do. And sometimes when people think, yeah, sure, I can describe it, 2 days later, their description of exactly the same process will be slightly different because they just cannot keep track of how I want this particular app to do certain things. So most developers particularly think they know what an app is supposed to do, but they are really making it up along the way as programming is being done. Now, how do I know this? Guilty as charged. Okay, I have done this many times, and I know the price is huge. When you're dealing with a complicated app. Now, if you're dealing with a small, tiny little app, it's no big deal. Okay, because all the perfect project. Okay, that one is pretty easy to do, and there's very few things that can go wrong. But if you're doing something that is complicated, that has a lot of logic, like timing out and stuff like that, things can go wrong, and you really have to get it down and know what your app is supposed to do. Now, very competent programmers, developers can do this. But programs written this way tend to be difficult to maintain and extend because things are just being made up as we go with our programming process. So now we are moving on to documentation. We already talked about use case diagrams for documentation, but the only purpose of a use case diagram is to remember why would someone install your app? Okay, that's the question that use case diagrams are supposed to answer, but not really quite how is this app supposed to interact with a user, which is what we want to capture now. So we're getting into a little bit more details of how your app is supposed to interact with a user in addition to use case diagrams, which is answering the question of why would someone want to install your app. So that's basically what this paragraph is talking about. Use case diagrams are only documents what a user can do with the system, but not really quite how it is done. So now we want to specify how something is done. But instead of using program code to do it, pseudocode or pictures, like that, we are going to take a slightly different route. Okay. Some people, especially good programmers, would say, okay, I'll just specify the logic of the program right away because I can translate the behavior of expected behavior of the app into actual code. And some people claim that they can do it in Java, in an actual programming language right away. Well, I'm pretty sure most people can do it. But as you do something like this, you can usually, it's difficult to think of all the possible ways, all the different ways of interacting with the app. That is the difficult part. Okay, as programmers, okay, I'm assuming that most of us here are developers or computer science, people. We already have a way of thinking, okay, the right way of using the app. Okay, what happens when we already know what the app is supposed to do and what a valid input is supposed to be and how it is, how a user is quote unquote supposed to interact with the app? What is the problem with that assumption? Well, let me ask you another question. Are your intended end users also computer scientists?
No.
Probably not, unless you're writing an app that has a very specific need. So that means your end users will probably use the app a little bit differently than what you think they should be using the app. Okay, so you have to think about all the different ways that things can go wrong as they click buttons in combinations that you never imagined. Why would somebody do it like this? Well, sometimes they do. So that's why it's not really just as simple as I'm just going to program the logic, assuming everything is going to work right. You kind of have to make assumptions that every step along the way something can go wrong, or people can do things that you do not expect. And this is what we're going to do now, is we'll basically use quote unquote a videotape to tape each instance or tape instances of use cases. In other words, we're just basically saying, okay, let's assume somebody is going to use your app for a particular use case. And can we go over a particular solid scenario of somebody actually using your app? Okay, that's what these diagrams are for. So in this case, I have an example. You're trying to write code on an industrial robotic arm to replicate what factory users, what factory workers would do. Instead of jumping into coding and say, oh, okay, I think I know, what a robotic arm is supposed to do, what you want to do is to first observe how human workers actually get things done. So this way you have a library of, videotape and say, okay, so this is how they attach a car door, to the hinge of a car. Okay, and we have to tighten up, the bolts, this way, and so, and you have the entire process already, on tape before you even write the first line of code to automate the process. In the UML sequence diagrams, and you can see that this one is a link, so I'm going to open up the link to Wikipedia, and then we'll go over there, in just a little bit. They're useful for this purpose. Each sequence diagram is a particular scenario played out. It does not contain any logic, but a sequence of interaction between instances of actors and the system. Okay, so we are no longer talking about actors, we're talking about instances of actors. In other words, this time it is specific. We're not talking about customers of a restaurant. We're not talking about your clients. We're talking about Joe. We're talking about Mary. We are talking about John. Okay, specific people, in a scenario of, let's say, interacting with a waitress or waiter at a restaurant. How to place an order, a specific order. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a quick look in Wikipedia. This is what a sequence diagram looks like. I have an example in my notes as well. It is separated into what we call lanes. So if you look at something vertically, it is called a lane. This is a particular lane here. This is another lane here. Each lane is representing actions taken by a particular instance of an actor or the system itself, in the interaction. And you can also see the arrows. The arrows indicate what is triggering what else. In this case, we have send, unsent email triggering some kind of processing on the server side. We have this new email triggering some kind of processing on the server side, and the server is responding to that request, and the response to the request will prompt the computer to click download email, and then trigger some more processing and so on. Okay, if you look at the lane vertically, it is a timeline. If you look at the interaction, it is showing you what is triggering what party to do what else. The example in the Wikipedia page is kind of abstract, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. But what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and look at the description of a sequence diagram. It's an interaction diagram that shows how processes operate with one another and in what order. Okay, so that really is the most important part. And hence the name sequence diagram. It doesn't represent logic at all. It doesn't tell you how do I make this decision that the system will respond and say this is invalid email, okay, invalid address. We don't care, okay? We just want to say, look at the system as a magical black box. This is what it is supposed to do. It is supposed to return and say your email address is invalid when you try to send an email to an account and the URL doesn't even work out in that case. So now we are switching back to my notes here. I have my own little example, so we'll go over that one. And this part we talked about it already. Each lane is a vertical column representing the timeline of a particular instance in a scenario. Solid blocks of a timeline represent active periods of an instance. We'll take a look at the golfer example. Actions of an instance can trigger actions of other instances. In other words, one particular instance can perform an action, but as a result of that action is triggering another instance to do something. The triggering is represented by horizontal arrows, and there are different types of horizontal arrows, and we'll go over this too. There are basically two types that we are concerned about. There are more if you want to go for the full UML, but as far as we are concerned, we are only interested in triggering, causing something to happen, and responding so that the waiting party can continue to do something. So we are only interested in those two. So here's an example of the golf assistance app, and in this case I have U1:golfer as one instance in the sequence diagram. I have S1:system as the other one. In this particular notation, U1 is the name of this particular golfer. In other words, I can have U2:golfer as another instance if the application allows the interaction between two different users. Okay, but in this case there's only one. The system is the system being documented. Unlike a use case where the system being documented is not represented by an actor, in a sequence diagram it is. Okay, so the system that you are trying to document is represented by an instance, has its own lane as well. Okay, so in this case, I'm trying to describe how a golfer may use my app to try to figure out the distance to a particular flagpole. Okay, so the golfer can choose the right club and do all sorts of other decisions. So the golfer would do something that is unnamed, but at some point the golfer is going to click a button on the screen that says capture flag. Okay, and that's what this event is for. And you can see the arrow is going in this direction. It is basically representing at the end of this solid block here, it is going to trigger the beginning of the other solid block. So right after the triggering, this is no longer solid, which means the golfer, the user, is going to be waiting for a response from the app itself. Okay. Once the other side, the system is triggered, it will do some processing, okay? and as a result of that processing, it's going to respond to the end user. The response in this case is an action. It's going to switch to camera mode. In other words, your screen will switch from the main screen that will allow you to select what do you want to do with the app, and as a response, it will switch to the camera mode. So on the screen, you can actually see what the camera is seeing. Okay, so the golfer can point it to the golf club. I mean, the post, the flag post that he or she wants to capture. So this block here is representing the golfer actually aligning the camera and pointing it to the right flagpole. At the end of that process, the user would click snap. So I'm assuming there's a button on the camera called snap, or there's an action that would trigger the snapping of the picture. Are there any questions at this point about a sequence diagram? Can everybody see that it is entirely different in terms of its purpose compared to a use case diagram? Yes. Okay? It captures a lot of details, and yet it doesn't show you the logic. Nowhere in here do I show conditional statements or loops or anything like that. I'm just describing as a third person observing the interaction between the golfer and the app, what that third person should be seeing. It's a documentation tool. So it is time to pass along the row sheet. I'll start here. Make sure you initial your name on the row sheet for the 9th of September.
I noticed the Wikipedia graph didn't have any separation at all, and the use column. It was all one instance for a bunch of stuff.
You mean the solid block here?
Just were they using a different paradigm?
I think it depends on, I think there's flexibility allowed here. The dotted line is really representing, inactive periods of a particular instance. Because if you have it solid all the time, that means, the golfer is doing something, when your app is doing something else.
I was wondering why the Wikipedia page didn't have any separations on their email.
I thought it did on the system side. You can see it on the server side. It does have the dotted line. It's just that on the computer side, it does not have a solid dotted line. So
why is that?
I do not know. I have to look it up.
Thank you.
All right. So going back, to the example here, the user will click the snap button, and then after that, the user or the golfer will be, idling, and then the system will pick it up and do some processing. Now, and after the snap, you can present the flag analysis screen. In other words, you click the snap button, and it will get out of the camera mode or the camera screen, and will get into the next screen, which is flag analysis screen. On that screen, there may be multiple options or multiple buttons that can be done, and the user would click estimate distance, and then the system will do some processing here, and then as a response, it will show the actual distance or the calculated or guesstimated distance to flag. Do I show here, how to use trigonometry to, return the distance? No. How no logic in here. Okay. As I said, this is not going to explain how something is done. It is just explaining how a particular use case may occur. Okay. Look at this as a diary. Okay. It is as a videotape. It's a third person using a videotape to record a potential, sequence of interaction between, in this case, a golfer and an app. Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
You want our use case diagram to look like this one?
No, a use case diagram should not look like this. No. A use case diagram should look like a use case diagram where you have a matchstick figure for each actor, which is a classification of users in that case, and then you have the bubbles. Each bubble is representing a value of your system. What someone or a user can do with your system. In this case, it would be estimate distance to flag. Okay, so this particular sequence diagram would correspond to the use case called estimate distance to flag, because that action, is actually providing a value to the user. Okay. Are there any other questions up to this point? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll just move on and talk about screenshots. It makes sense to include screenshots, especially in this case. Switch to camera mode, flag analysis screen, and show distance to flag. So you can, if you want to, include screenshots. In this case, we can, quite easily, make up those particular screens. Screenshots or mock screenshots can be done in many ways. You can hand draw something and then just use your cell phone to capture it. You can also use a graphics program such as Inkscape to produce more professional looking mock screens. You can also use App Inventor. If I switch back to App Inventor, remember how I call this particular screen here, this entire page? I call this the resources editor, even though App Inventor does not have a particular name for this screen, but I do want to call it a particular name so I can distinguish this from the blocks editor screen. Okay, so what you can do is to use a screenshot utility program and just take a screenshot of whatever designs you have here. It is, for the most part, what you see is what you get, even though it's not entirely like that. It is close enough that if you want to capture a screen, this is not a bad way to do it. Are there any questions about how to take screenshots of basically mock screens that you think your app should present to an end user? No questions? Okay. Does everybody know how to take screenshots in a particular operating system that you'll be using? Okay. No?
Print screen.
Print screen. Okay. So in Windows, you press the print screen key, and the entire screen will be captured as, I think, into the clipboard. And then from there, you can use a particular program like Paint, to paste it and then process it. Yep.
You can also hold Alt and spin out the current window, or just screenshot the current window.
Okay. Now, does it prompt you to save the file, or does it just capture it? Say again? Okay, so you copy into the clipboard, and then once it's in the clipboard, you can use Paint, paste it into Paint, and then crop it and do whatever you want to do. If you're using Linux, okay, I'm not sure how many of you will be using Linux, but in Linux, it depends on which Windows manager you're using. In XFCE4, I just have to go to Accessories, and then go to Screenshot, and it gives me a few options. The best option is select a region, because if I do it this way, I can just select the portion that I want to capture, and as soon as I'm done, selecting it, release the mouse button, it will prompt me to say, do you want to save it? Do I want to capture it to copy it to the clipboard, or what? So I'm going to say save, click OK, and I can save it as a PNG file. It's pretty handy, especially when you want to just capture a portion of the entire screen. This tool is really useful. If you're using Windows, I think print screen only captures the entire screen. Sorry?
If you hold down Alt, it'll capture the active window.
Okay, so if you hold down Alt, it will capture the active window, but it doesn't give you the option of selecting which portion to capture.
With Windows 7, you have.
Say again?
With Windows 7, you have a snipping tool that can select a certain region and save it as a file.
Oh, okay. So that's after you press Alt print
No,
screen.
it's just the program itself.
Okay, so it's kind of like the
Windows.
app that I just showed you guys. Okay. So it depends on which version of Windows, because I don't think that's in XP or 7 or listed on actually.
How do you get to the scissors?
Okay.
How do you get to the snips? Is it
Oh,
vertical?
you just type it in.
Snips.
That's snipping tool.
Snipping tool. So I guess you just go to the start button and type
Just type
snip.
it,
Yeah. It will find it and you can just click it open. All right. So for details of how to do a screenshot, I can talk about it later. But that will be helpful, when you're capturing your sequence diagram, you can actually display the screens, involved in the process. At this point, nothing is really set in stone. In other words, you don't have to worry and say, but what if I forgot about something? Well, you can always change it later. But it is just helpful, to have a visual idea of what the flag analysis screen may look like. The next question here is an interesting one, because it's just asking, how many sequence diagrams do you need? Potentially you can have an infinite number of sequence diagrams because there can be different ways of interacting with the system. So the answer to this question is as many as it takes to remind you and whoever is working with you what an app is supposed to do. That's all. I mean, it's a documentation tool. If you go overboard and make too many sequence diagrams, it is not going to be read by other people, and you cannot possibly go over all the sequence diagrams that you have created. Then it has lost its purpose. If you create too few of these, it is not representative enough of your app, and it's not going to help you with the next step to actually come up with the logic of the app. So you just have to capture enough so that you can look at the sequence diagrams in order to figure out the logic of the application. And how many is enough depends on many factors. It depends on your application itself, how complicated it is, how many different options are presented, how many tricky cases there are. It depends on your programming level. How many sequence diagrams do you need to remind yourself what are these tricky situations to deal with that you have to deal with. It is important to remember that the sequence diagram does not capture the logic of an app. It is really just to capture the sequence, the events themselves. And typically, one sequence diagram should limit its scope to one use case. In other words, you don't have to say, okay, once the golfer has estimated the distance, now it is time to select a club. Okay, so club selection, if it is a separate use case, can have its own sequence diagram. It doesn't have to be included in the same sequence diagram. All right. So this way, it makes it easy to group sequence diagrams with each use case in a use case diagram. Are there any questions about this particular slide? So we are not talking about the logic of programming just yet. We are just trying to document how somebody is supposed to use a particular app. Now, I'm just kind of switch gear here. For those of you who have not taken any programming classes before and have no experience programming prior to this class, and you're taking cisp300 right now, what topic is that class on at this point? Is anyone taking P300 right now? Okay, so can you kind of tell me which topic they are on right now? Conditional statements. That sounds about right. Because I just finished conditional statements in my CISP3 classes. Okay, thank you. That is helpful. I just want to keep an eye on how much logic is already gone over in CISP300, because at some point I do want to give you guys the tools and specify the logic of an app, but I don't want to introduce that way ahead of time, so it's not synchronized with your CISP300 class. All right, so we're done with this slide. We're going to move on. And since we are done with this one, the first thing I want to do is just to show you how to use Omelette to draw sequence diagrams. So I'm going to start out Omelette on my side. And in a sequence diagram, if you look at the palette, you can see that they have certain types of arrows for a sequence diagram. We don't want the classes, we want the...
You need to use a default. Where's default?
Yep.
You need to use
you can select sequence diagrams. No, mine doesn't seem to want to display anything. But from this screen, I can actually select the sequence diagram items too. Let's see if I can find it. Yep, it's not showing anything in the sequence diagram. portion. Might have something to do with how it's installed. It's also an older version. Well, this is a good.
I use Windows and it's strong.
Okay, so I'm going to reinstall it, so I can show you guys how to install it. Even this is using Linux. The other way, is actually similar if you use Windows. So let me go back to the Omelette website. Download this particular file. It is called Omelette 12.1 standalone. It is a zip file. So I just click it, and it will be downloaded into my downloads folder. That's fine. I'm just going to save it over there. It's a pretty small file, so it downloads in just pretty much no time using the fast network here. I click it, and because it's a zip file, it will open it up as a zip file, so I can look at the content in the file. Maybe. If that's not working, I just have to go to that folder and unzip it manually. Okay, so once it's unzipped manually, I can use my file manager to navigate into that folder. So it'll be under my downloads, Omelette. And inside there, for those of you who use Windows, it's easy. You just double click the exe file and it should start up the application. For those of you who are using something other than Windows, like me, I'm using Linux. There are two ways to start it up. I can double click on the jar file, or I can use the shell file. I would first try the jar file, and you can see it's starting up just fine. And I'll try again to go to sequence diagrams, and this time it works. All right, excellent. So there's something wrong with either with the version that I have installed, which is version 11 point something, or something else with the process.
You click the top right arrow of the application, well, kind of black arrow that's down here to select the sequence diagram.
Top right.
Kind of upward, like right. Oh, I think you're already selected it. I think you're already selected it. I think you did actually select what you want to do right there. Okay, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, but it wouldn't happen with the actual pre-installed Omelette application. Does not give me the correct palette when I select sequence diagrams, but the one that I just installed works just fine. Yep. So in this case it does work, and we can create instances. Remember, double clicking is going to copy something into your own diagram. So if I double click instance here, it's going to create an instance on the other side, and then you can change how this looks. The underline part, basically says, the entire thing should be underlined. You can see there's an underline here, and there's an underline here, which means everything in between should appear, underlined. So in this case, I can, let's see, what kind of app do you guys want me to kind of model, with a sequence diagram?
Chat program. Chat program.
A chat program. Okay, so let's make a let's try to model a chat program and make one sequence for a chat program. Okay, so in this case I'm gonna say use a particular name. In this case we'll just say tacky in this case, and then instead of saying instance, I'm gonna say chatter. Now in this case, I'm assuming that there is an actor named chatter in the use case diagram, because I want to make sure that whatever I draw here can be linked back to the use case diagram. So the use case diagram for a particular chat program should have a matchstick figure named chatter, okay, which is a classification of users for that particular app. I'm going to make another one to represent the system itself. So I'm going to move this one over, click it. And in this case, that's the actual system. I just call it S1, just so that it has a name. Next, I can draw, the dotted line. So even the dotted line itself is an object that you can, replicate and copy to the other side. Okay, just like that. A solid block, the same way. Everything that you want to draw, you have to double click on the palette side so that you create a new instance that on your in your actual diagram. When it's time for me to initiate a chat, I would do something. I'm going to interact with the system. Every interaction with your app is represented by arrows. Okay, everything that your user does will be an arrow going in the direction going to the right-hand side. The response of the system in this case will appear as an arrow going in the opposite direction. But even so, even like that, the arrows have specific meanings. So in this case, I'm going to use this particular arrow here, and it's already making the wrong. There we go. So I'm going to make it link to this part here, and have the system to idle initially until it has something to do. So right now, I have it attached to here, and then start the solid block to represent the actual processing of a request from the user. Okay. Are there any questions about the picture up to this point? How to draw it? It's a little bit tedious, okay, but it is a nice way to document the system. So in this case, you can see in the properties box, the actual text is here, and the appearance of the arrow is up here. I'm not going to change the appearance of the arrow because this is how we represent synchronized call. Okay, there are two different types of arrows. One is called sync and one is called async. Synchronized means when one side initiates the action, it stops. It waits for the other side to finish. And asynchronous means it does not stop. It just keeps going. Okay. Are there any questions about synchronous versus asynchronous? Synchronous call does not describe the actual trigger or what I'm doing with the system. So in this case, I can say specify how do you call the person you want to chat with. It's not recipient because recipient applies to email, because somebody is receiving something. So when you want to chat with somebody, how do you call that somebody, the person that you want to chat with?
Put an identifying name or number.
But I want to just say specify that person, the person that you want to chat with. I suppose I can just name that. Username. Okay. Okay. Specify friend to chat with. Okay. That's kind of long, but it works. Okay. And at that point, I don't have anything else to do. Okay, so I'm gonna put an idle line over here to represent that I'm not gonna do anything. I'm waiting for the system to respond. And I can drag this bar here to make it longer or shorter. And I'm waiting for a return. And I'll use asynchronous return in this case. On this side, I'm going to do some more processing once it responds. Okay, but at this point I have to kind of work out a little bit of details because I want to specify in this particular instance, am I going to find that person? Okay, there are different possible outcomes, but I'm not going to try to, I'm not capturing the logic, I'm just trying to capture one particular way of interacting with the system. So I have three actual possible ways to proceed at this point. One, the system found that person, and that person is online. Okay, so that's one way it can respond back and say, okay, that person is ready to chat, and give me a screen so I'm ready to chat. Second thing is that particular person is in the system, but is not currently available for chatting. And then the third scenario is that person is not even there. Okay, I type up a name, and the chatting program says, I don't know that person, I do not know that account. So those are the three things that can possibly happen. in a particular sequence diagram, you can only document one of the three cases. So let me just model this, as the case where that person does not exist.
So you'd have to do the same diagram 3 different times for all of the scenarios?
Say again?
So you'd have to do this diagram 3 different times for all 3 of the scenarios?
If they're tricky enough that you think you need a diagram to represent it, yes. On the other hand, if it is simple enough and you think, oh, okay, that's not, something that needs to be documented, then you don't have to document it. So I can say here, the other account does not exist. And then we also have to specify if the other account does not exist, what do you think how should the system respond to your request to talk to the other person?
Send them an email. Send them an email.
Well, but if the other account does not exist, there's no email account associated with it either.
So you can put in their email address.
Sorry? Say again?
Their email address, saying you want to join this, so and so is on this website or whatever this app.
Okay. Then you have to specify the email address, right? Okay. Present invitation screen. Okay, so that's possibly something that the system can come back with is to indicate the other user, the other account does not exist. Okay, so you cannot chat with the other person, but it can also come back and present the invitation screen. Okay, so the invitation screen will basically have the account name and also an email address. So you can enter the email address of whoever you're trying to chat with, and the system can then send an email and tell the person, hey, this so-and-so is trying to chat with you, but since you're not on this particular chatting system, it's not possible, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of tedious, okay? This would be a good place to present, to also take a screenshot of the invitation screen. And this would be a good point to capture the initial screen of the app. What button do you click? What text box do you present? And what button do you click in order to trigger the operation to initiate a chat session? Yep.
Can you show us how to print screen?
The picture cannot be put into the diagram itself, so you will have to kind of use it, you have to use a separate document to include the screenshots. Because as far as this is concerned, I don't think it allows the import of an entire bitmap. Yeah, so there's no way to include a bitmap into this picture. What you can do is, when you present a particular screen, put an ID next to it. So then you can use a separate document to correspond the ID of each screen to an actual sample screenshot. Right. So are there any questions about how to use Omelette to create sequence diagrams? Questions? So as I said a little bit earlier, we're not going to get into the inner frames and all the other complicated stuff. We're just going to focus on really simple interaction. A user performs a particular thing, the system will come back usually with a screen or a message. So that way you're just documenting a sequence of a particular way to interact with your app.
I have a question. How did you make that box longer, that one on the right?
Oh, the box itself? You just drag it, position your mouse pointer to one end or the other end of it, and then you just drag it.
I tried that. I just didn't see it.
Does it work?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, getting back to the notes here. So that part is pretty much done. I'm done talking about sequence diagrams. In this class, I'm not expecting like really, really lengthy and very specific sequence diagrams, but just knowing what it is and how to create one, can be useful. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to the next section. We already talked about event handling, and this time I can talk about properties of the screen. Okay, so this is actually a good segue into actual programming. And I can go to the App Inventor itself. The screen is the entire screen itself. If you go to this middle view here, the viewer pane, the entire thing is the screen. You can see in this case I have it highlighted. The other way to highlight or select the screen is to go to the components pane and click the screen, which is the top level container. Are there any questions about how to find and select a screen in App Inventor? No questions? Okay. When you scroll all the way to the right hand side, you will see a pane called Properties. The Properties pane will change depending on what is being selected. But when I select the screen, you can see these particular properties. The properties reflect attributes of whatever component that you have selected. In this case, the attributes include align horizontal. In other words, when I place components into the screen itself as the top level container, how should those items be arranged? The default is left, but you are more than welcome to change it. If you change it to center, you can see, in the mock-up screen here, what you see is what you get, the WYSIWYG screen. You can see the buttons are now aligned in the center way. If you select right, they'll be aligned to the right-hand side, and left is the usual, is the default. I think it works for most applications, but if you prefer, center, that's good too. Are there any questions at this point about what is align horizontal as a single property? You can actually change that later. The app itself, can change it in code. Okay, so what you're specifying here are just the default when the screen starts up. But your app actually can have blocks to change each and every single one of these. I'm just going to go over each and every single one. Some are really obvious, and other ones may not be as obvious. Align vertical is grayed out at this point. I cannot remember how to turn it back on, so I'll just let it grayed out for now. It's one of the other properties that can prompt align vertical to turn back on again. Background color is simple. Right now the default is white. You can change it to light gray, then it turns into light gray, and you can turn it back to white again. Oops. Oh, I turned it to none. So let's turn it to white again. And that's how you can specify the background color. You can change it later on in code, just like everything else. Close screen animation, allows you to specify one of these many different fancy ways of closing an app. The default is whatever the system specifies. Now, icon is interesting because icon is only useful once you package the application into an APK file and install it. If you install it, let me start up the emulator so I can show you what I mean by the icon. So I'm gonna open up the blocks editor. Instead of Java, it's T. So. Alright, so now we have the blocks editor open, and I'm going to create a new emulator because I want to show you what the icon does. This is a really fast computer. You can see how quickly the emulator pops up. I think the emulator runs pretty much at the same speed as a real device too, if not faster than some of the slower devices. Alright. As soon as we get to this screen, I don't even need to have the app up and running, but I will try to get it up and running too. So I select emulator 5554, which is the default. I click the drawer button. Every single one of these is an icon. In other words, how do you want your app to appear as an icon is what the property is trying to specify. You can give it a big bitmap if you want to, but everything will be scaled down to a little square. Okay. And this is the app that I'm running at this point. if your device is capable of tracking multiple apps running at the same time, I think Jelly Bean can do that. That icon will also be reflected when you look at the tabs of all the different apps running. But as long as you're running it through this particular option here, the icon does not show up at all. It will only show the icon of App Inventor Companion, but not of the actual application itself. So the icon of this particular screen, this property here, will only be useful once you install the app using the APK method. Are there any questions about this? Yep.
How about if I have 2 screens?
Say again?
If I have 2 screens.
If you have
2 screens. 2.
tools,
2 screens.
2 screens, the 2 screens would use the same icon. I think it only uses the first screen's icon. The first screen is special because it's also the home screen. You know, if you go back from that screen, the app closes. So the first screen is very special because it's the initial screen and it has control over the other screens. And so the icon that you specify in the first screen is the one that it uses for the app itself. Okay, how do we specify a bitmap for this purpose? If you click this, it will open up a selector box, a list box here.
Question.
Yep.
Okay, so if you click this, I didn't catch what you clicked.
Click this one here.
Where?
Click this box. Click the box. Look at where my mouse pointer is.
Okay.
I just click the box.
Okay.
Okay. So when you click the box, at this point I do not have any bitmap resources uploaded. So the first thing you can do is to upload one if you have one prepared already. What if you don't have one prepared already? You can always draw one. Okay, it's just a bitmap. There are different tools to do that. You know, it's entirely up to you guys to decide what tool you want to use. If you use Windows, I think Paint is included in all distributions of Windows, so that would be one program that you can use just for testing purposes. It's not really the best program to use for this purpose, but it does work. So let's just say that I want to upload a particular bitmap. Okay, I'm going to paint one right now. This part you don't have to follow because I'm just going to use my Inkscape application here. Inkscape is an interesting application. It's not like a photo editor type of app. This one allows you to do a lot of hand drawing and hand painting, which is nice because everything is scalable. Okay, it will save the file as an SVG file, which stands for Scalable Vector Graphics, which means if you want to, you can blow it up to poster size and everything will still be clear. If you want to downsize it to a single icon, it will still downsize correctly too. So using this tool, I'm just going to make my little app icon. So I'm just gonna do something like this. Okay, stroke. Duplicate. I'm just trying to make a smiley face. So here's my smiley face, and I want to increase the thickness of this line here. There we go. Okay, so here's a little happy face that I'm going to use as my icon. Using this particular tool, I can do it in several ways. But one way to do it is to select the portion that I want to export as a bitmap file. And then I go to File, I go to Export Bitmap. Only the portion that I have selected. The bitmap size is not really that important. As long as it's big enough, it's good, because all I'm going to do is to downsize it to a icon. Okay, so right now the bitmap is pretty much square. I'm kind of surprised that I got it so close to an actual square. It's 244 by 243. It's only off by 1 pixel. It's okay. It's going to look all right. So I'm going to specify the name of the bitmap file. and I'm gonna put it into my temp folder because I really don't need to save this one. So I'm just call it, I will call this icon.png and click export. I clicked it already, and then switch back to this particular screen here. So this time I can now select and click upload new, select a file, go to my temp folder. The way you do this will be slightly different because you will be using Windows, but it's kind of similar because you just have to select where you will be uploading your bitmap from. I have my icon.png file, click open, and then click OK here. And the file is being uploaded, and once it's uploaded, it is automatically selected as my icon. Are we still doing okay so far? But remember, this won't reflect, it won't do anything until you install the app as an APK file. Then the icon would actually show up in your drawer. Okay. In other words, when you click the home screen, it will show up as a drawer. In your drawer. So it will appear as one of these icons once you install the app. But since I'm not running it as an installed app, it doesn't show like that. So are there any questions about the icon setting of your screen? Okay. Questions? Open screen animation and close screen animation should match, okay? Just for consistency. They don't have to be the same, but I think matching would be nice so that they look consistent. Your app will look consistent. This one is important, screen orientation. As it is unspecified, it is actually the same as portrait, okay? If you have a horizontal device like a tablet, this will lock it to portrait orientation. So even when you're holding a device, okay, let me open it up. I'm actually running an app that I wrote yesterday. So, which actually it rotates. Okay, it senses the orientation. It uses the orientation sensor, and then the application rotates with it. If you specify unspecified, okay, if you use unspecified for screen orientation, it's going to be locked like this. So even when I rotate the screen, you have to turn your head to look at the screen. Not recommended. So the first thing you want to do if you're writing an app that might run on devices that can be that can rotate, you want to specify sensor. So this will make use of the orientation sensor, and then your app will automatically rotate. Any questions about this part? No questions? Okay. The next one is scrollable. In case you specify so many buttons that they won't all fit on one screen, this is basically asking the question, do you want to present a scroll bar, horizontal and vertical, so that if your screen is too big to fit on the actual device, people can scroll it to at least be able to get to all the different buttons and controls? And unless you have a very good reason to turn it off, you should probably leave it on. Okay? The only one time that scrollable should be turned off is when you are making a game like Angry Birds or something like that, where your entire screen is the entire app. Okay, it should not be bigger than the screen itself. The title is the name of the title screen. Typically you want to rename it instead of screen 1. You can make it anything you want. Okay, this has nothing to do with the name of the component itself. This is the actual thing that you're presenting on the screen. So if you change screen 1, it will just change the way it appears on the screen here. So you should probably change this to something that reflects your app, especially because this is the first screen of your entire app. You really have to be careful and name it accordingly. You probably want to name it after the app itself. Okay, whatever app you're writing, make the screen the title of the screen consistent with the name of the app itself, so that when people start up your app, they look at the title screen, they know what app you're running. The next two seem to be related. They are kind of related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Let's explain the other one first. Version name. Version name is what an end user can see when they look at the apps, in your settings screen. So let me see if I can get to that settings screen on my tablet here. Okay. So if you go to home, oh, actually for this one I don't have to go to home. But this one I just have to go to settings. There are different Androids have different ways of getting to the settings screen. But once you get to the settings screen, you can scroll to apps here, which will display all the apps that are installed. You select one of the apps. Let's say I select. Well, you guys cannot see the actual detail, but if you select one of those apps here, it will show you version blah blah blah. Version name is what is shown when you click an app and it displays the actual, displayed version of the displayed version of the app. That is what the end user will see. So if version name is what is displayed when you look at an app, what exactly is version code? Version code is an internal code for your app. Okay, it's an integer. It has to be an integer, which means it has to be a whole number. And that is used internally for your app to keep track of itself. And this is also one way for you to tell whether your app has been updated, because your app can actually check its own version code. So different versions can behave differently. Or if you have an upgrade version, you can now look at the database or whatever persistent data that it has saved and say, okay, do I need to do a conversion because of the upgrade? And you can use this as a clue so that you can make sure that whatever file or whatever persistent data you have saved is going to be consistent with the upgraded version of the app itself. Okay, when we get to that point, we'll talk about it. But the key point here is, even if you don't change this, every time you release a new version of your app to the outside world, make sure you update version code, because that's one way to keep track of what a person is running on a particular device. Am I doing okay so far? Do you guys understand the importance of updating version code? Because version code is more important from a developer's perspective than version name. Version name is just what is displayed. Okay? All right. Yep, go ahead.
How about 1.1? Can I use
as version code?
Yeah, no.
I'm not sure. It doesn't take a decimal point. It has to be an integer. So as I suspected, so basically the way you do it, is every time you re-release or you update whatever APK file you allow people to install, you have to crank it up by 1 at least. So that way, everything that you release is unique. All right. Are there any other questions? No other questions? Okay. Has anyone explored all the other drawers inside the palette? What about these Lego Mindstorm stuff? Does anyone know what it is, how it's useful? Okay, so,
It's like for simple robotic stuff.
It's for simple robotic stuff, but it can be a lot of fun too. So the question now is, how can something like this on my cell phone be related to robotics? Lego Mindstorms is a robotic kit that you can purchase from Lego. And how do you attach something like this to a Lego Mindstorms robot to control it? Because all of these blocks are basically for controlling and reading sensors in a robotics kit. Well, the answer is
With a USB cable or Wi-Fi?
Bluetooth. Okay, the answer is Bluetooth. I think this is always Bluetooth enabled, only using Bluetooth. So what you can do, okay, I'm not going to go over these, by the way, in this course, but I just want to point it out just in case someone is interested and say, but what are these for? Well, it allows you to control a Lego Mindstorms kit using your Android tablet or cell phone. It renders the controller on the robot to be just a slave brain, but all the logic can run from your phone using Bluetooth. Okay, so it does open up all kinds of possibilities, because the controller that comes with Mindstorms is powerful, but nothing compared to what you can do with a tablet or a cell phone. So by using these blocks, you can actually change the complexity of the application that you can run on the robotics kit. And guess what? You also have a full screen to interact with your robot. You can have one button to say automate, okay, and then the robot can do things on its own. You can also have your remote control screen here. Change this screen so it resembles a remote control screen. Then you can remotely control your robot that you construct using the Lego Mindstorms kit. So the possibilities are really endless. You can actually do a lot of fun stuff with these blocks. But I'm not going to go over those in this class because we're going to be focusing on user interaction. I got one question from the previous class. We only have about 4 minutes to go today. I got one question about how do I time out something? How can I tell that somebody has not done something for 1 second and stuff like that? If you go to basics, you will see an option called clock. If you drop clock into the viewer, it will also appear as a component here, but it is a non-visible component. Okay, like an NXT drive. The next question is, how do I get rid of something? We talked about it a little bit. Go ahead.
Hit the delete button.
Well, I don't think that works. Okay, hitting the delete button. The delete button does not work in the viewer pane.
Right there on the right.
Actual button right there.
Is it a name?
Right next to rename.
You have to do it inside the components pane. So the viewer pane is only good for dragging and dropping stuff and also reordering things, but it's not good for deleting or renaming things. If you want to delete or rename a component, you have to use the components pane and select the one that you want to delete. Okay, NXT color sensor, and then click delete. NXT drive, click delete, like that. But getting back to clocks. If I go to my blocks editor, just passed it right here, you can go to my blocks and then you can see clock 1 is now a drawer, and these are the things that you can specify to do with clock 1. Now with clock 1, it is a timer. You can have a timer event, so you can program it to say, okay, I want it to create an event in how many milliseconds. You have to specify in milliseconds. So if you want to specify a delay, you can use, okay, let me take a look here. You have to enable the timer, and then you set up the interval. Okay? And once you have it enabled and set up the timer interval, then it will basically, it will have a periodic event. Okay? If you set it up to have an interval of 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second, then you will get one event every second. So you can attach something to do every 1 second. Am I doing okay so far? So instead of having an event triggered by a person clicking something, you can actually have your timer or your clock to create those events, quote unquote, in the background. So you can associate logic to go along with that too. Okay. Let me see if I can just make a change here, and I just want to make a very simple app to reflect what I just said. All right, so in here, I'm gonna have checkbox 1. So what I want to do is to toggle this checkbox here every 1 second. So every second it will check and uncheck, check and uncheck by itself. Okay, so let's see how we can use the tools and also the components that we have so far to do this. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to set up the interval. And to set up the interval, I want to set it up from the beginning, or I can set it up in the other screen here, because when I click clock, it has its own properties. Let me scroll over here. It is already enabled, it's always fires, and the interval is 1,000 milliseconds. Remember, the interval is specified in milliseconds. 1 millisecond is 1,000th of a second. So it takes 1,000 to make up exactly 1 second. So that means I can go back to my blocks editor, go to my blocks, go to clock 1, and drag and drop the event handler called when clock1.timer. And this logic, whatever I specify inside this block here, will now execute every second. I just want it to toggle. Okay, if you want something to toggle, you go to the checkbox, whatever checkbox you want to toggle. You go to the checkbox on drawer, and then we can try to invert the status of the checkbox, which is this one here. I want to set the check state to whatever it was not before. Okay. To say not, you go to built-in because it's a logic type of operator. You specify not, and then we have to refer back to the current state of the checkbox. So we have to go back to the checkbox drawer and say, is it currently checked? Well, if it is currently checked, then the negation of that would mean it is not going to be checked, so it will turn off. Okay. So we will try to give this one a try. Go back to my emulator here. Connect the device. It's already connected, but I'm not sure how to get back to the app that is running. It's already connected. Do you want to restart app on the device? Yes. Okay. So there we go. We're gonna restart the app itself. So this time, we should see the checkbox, checking and unchecking all by itself every second.
So can you do something in this time, like synchronous, asynchronous?
Asynchronous. Oh yes, yeah. You can use asynchronous now. All right. Do you see how the checkbox is doing?
Can you try something like text? To click something.
I can still do something. It's still gonna. Oh, there's a typo here. Concise. It's in the background, so you can't see it. But it does not interfere. Those two things are actually happening at the same time, because each one has its own event handler. So in theory, they're happening at the same time, but in practice, obviously, you're limited by the number of processors. So they're multitasking, basically. All right. Because I got a question about how to do a timeout. How do I know that somebody has not touched a button for so long? And this is one way to do it. Okay. Any questions?
I still see where it's checking every second, but where does it happen? I should see it checking every second. Where does it happen?
See, it's right there. Checks for checkbox 1. This box is checking.
It's right here.
All the time.
It's happening right here. And your
Check
question?
it, it'll stop blinking.
Nope. It will just change the other. It will just reverse it. Because it's taking a look. Every second it will take a look at the current state of the checkbox and then reverse it. Okay. So are there any other questions? Now, if you want to start the timer exactly at a certain time, what you need to do is to, in your own code, you have to look at the clock's properties, and what you need to do is to disable it until it is time that you want to enable it. Okay, so you want to look at the enabled property as well as the always fires property in order to start it exactly when you want to start it. But if you wanted to only do a one-shot thing, like I just want to time out a particular option or a particular action, then when the timer expires, you want to turn it off, because if you don't turn it off, it will click again and again and again. Okay. This is a little bit advanced. I just want to answer the question that somebody sent me last week, so that's why I kind of mentioned this. All right, we are running out of time in the lecture. I will let you guys, continue with your omelet documentation. Yep, go ahead.
So I think you were referring to that question.
Okay, yeah.
So when I do this, so it starts out with the TV, and then it's asking if it says this, which it does, then it would change it to Happy Kitty 2. So that's 10 seconds, but it doesn't actually show this label. It just goes from Happy Kitty to Happy Kitty 2. It doesn't show that label right there.
Okay.
But it's working because it it shows this. But there's no timeout there, so is this how you would use this?
That's not a good way to do a timeout. You know, the way to do a timeout, the best way is to use a timer. This actually chews up processing resources. In other words, if you're actually putting this on an Android device, it will drain the battery real fast. But if you use a timer, it does not. A timer device, you know, is a low power device built into the chip itself to keep track of time. So if you use a timer, you know, the way that I described it here, it doesn't use up any more battery juice than it does.
But I did set this up right though. I mean, in theory, it actually
Kind of.
worked like that.
Kind of. Let me turn off the
I'm still
recorder.
trying to understand these blocks a little bit.
Let me turn off the recorder first, and I'll answer your question.